Hey, Brian, how you doing, man?
Good, man. How you doing?
Dude, I'm so happy to have you. Like finally coming down here in Manchester to engage and just have this
Word.
conversation.
Yeah, man. It's been a long time coming. We've been kind of talking about doing this for a while, so I'm super glad to be here.
Super, super. So I usually start with something super cheesy, right? So let's say
Okay.
that you're like super hungry. It's like middle of the night. Like, what would be your go-to? What are you going to grab inside your cabinet in order to fulfill that hunger?
That's a funny question, actually. Believe it or not, probably as lame as it might sound, probably some almonds or something like that.
Just regular almond.
Right. Unless, if there's Oreos, you know what I mean? Then it's hard to say no to Oreos. But honestly, yeah, probably I like to keep the flavored almonds and stuff like that. Like they're kind of addictive. So I'm best known as a visual artist based on the seacoast in New Hampshire. It's kind of funny, when we met, there was a lot going on in my life. I was in the process of moving to Massachusetts, was actually starting a new day job, and there was all kinds of things going on at the school, of course, with that incident that happened there. And my daughter was part of the group of students that founded Project Dream. So I was very fortunate to be there at the beginning to help that group kind of come together, along with their dean advisor and so forth. And I know you were involved with some of that, but super proud to see what they've done and all that kind of stuff. Dover is an interesting community. I first moved to New Hampshire in 2000, and at that time, it was very, very different than how it is now, especially in a place like Dover. Dover's grown so much and become so much more diverse, that kind of some of the issues, I think, or the growing pains that they're having were kind of inevitable, and it really opened up, I think, discussion and for people to recognize how the community is changing. When I first opened my studio, it was kind of funny. It was maybe a little bit before its time, and where it was. So I originally opened the space as an urban clothing store in the front. It was my art studio in the back. My whole thought was that the clothing store would essentially help fund my work. And it was maybe a decent concept, and a lot of people said that it was too early for its time. But as I look back, it actually did better than I wanted to admit at the time. I was just running a business for me was something new, and I learned a lot from it. But I failed pretty hard, and when I look back, I learned a lot of lessons through that. But it was kind of funny at the time. People used to tell me all the time, "Oh man, you don't belong here. You should be here. You should be there. You should be in some big city someplace." And I'm like, the more I thought about it, I'm like, no, that's why I do belong here.
And why were they saying that? Were they saying that because the type of what you were creating and them kind of acknowledging your talent, saying, "Man, you're limited by being here."
Right. I think they meant it as a compliment, because my work is so urban, and just my whole kind of persona and how I operate is different than what people were seeing on the seacoast in New Hampshire. But for me, it just that kind of gave my role in the community more purpose, and especially recognizing how the community was changing. So my background, my father is from Korea originally. He's half Korean, half black. His mother was a Korean woman, and his father was a black American GI. And so there was a whole generation of these mixed kids that were a product of the Korean War. And it was almost genocidal at the time. I mean, the people there had no desire for all these mixed kids, and these orphanages that a lot of them were in were really essentially trying to, for kind of lack of a better term, kind of kill as many of them off as they could, you know what I mean, so that they wouldn't essentially infiltrate their culture, and essentially dilute, their culture. And some of these kids were adopted and came to the States and other places. My father was lucky to survive that. He was actually thrown out of a window as an infant, and essentially discarded, and was brought to one of these orphanages and was raised there.
This is in Korea.
This is in Korea, right? And then so he was actually he was severely physically disabled. He essentially was born without the ball or sockets for his hips, so he essentially didn't have hips. But that also, as far as what's been said, it could have been a result of the fall from being thrown out the window as an infant. No one's ever really been sure. And then my mother was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis as a teenager and had rheumatoid arthritis in her entire body. It was so heavily medicated, she wasn't supposed to be able to have kids. So the reason my last name is Cartier is kind of funny. My father being from Korea is, so he was a little bit too old to be adopted, but the Cartier family of East Grand Forks, Minnesota, took in my father. He took their last name. These people had 6 kids of their own and adopted or / fostered 15 other kids, right? All from other countries and all with some kind of disability. And so he took their last name. And my mother was also very, very disabled, was never supposed to be able to have kids. And they were so certain of this that they ended up adopting 2 children who are my brothers from the same village that my father's from.
Wow.
And a couple of years later, all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, my mother's pregnant. So I was essentially never supposed to exist. Whether we talk about just the unlikelihood of my father, successfully being able to, find his way to the United States and to even have any kind of life, to my mother not being able to have kids and so forth. So what keeps me grounded is knowing that the fact that I'm even here is, took a lot of different stars aligning, for me to even be here in the first place. So I feel very fortunate to be here, and I want to do as much with my time here as I can, and essentially create as much as I can, make as much of an impact on this world as I possibly can, whether that be through my art, through my daughter, through the life that I live, or just the example that I'm able to show, being able to navigate my way through, coming from a place like North Dakota, moving to the Boston area, and actually, having some form of success, however you define that. But that's essentially what kind of keeps me grounded. Is I remember these things every single day, about how, but the fact that I'm even here is special.
Thank you for sharing that. And for my last question, the theme of my podcast is persevere to excel. And that perseverance, it's really